Mr. Majewski's Anatomy 32 class lecture, Chapter 12, Blood. So, here's a good image of a number of blood cells, which hopefully by the end of the lecture you'll have a good idea of which blood cells are which and what they actually do. So, functions of the blood. One big important thing is transportation, specifically of things like oxygen and carbon dioxide, which basically are nutrients and wastes. Also, blood transports heat, hormones, and other signals for the body. Blood is also involved in regulation. It helps maintain homeostasis in all the body for various things like pH, temperature, and osmotic pressure. Again, homeostasis means making sure that your blood or your body is at the just right point. And protection. The blood has the ability to clot. This way, if you get injured, you don't lose an excessive amount of fluids. And the blood is also where a lot of the immune functions are occurring. So, if you look at the total human body, you'll see that 8% of the human body, on average, is whole blood. And if you take that 8% and break it up, you see that 55% is blood plasma, which is mostly water with some proteins and other solutes. And the other 45% is what's called formed elements, basically cells and cell-like structures, which is mostly red blood cells, but also includes white blood cells and platelets. And as you can see, there are a number of white blood cells. We'll be talking about all of them. But let's start with blood plasma. Well, as I said before, that is fluid. It's the extracellular matrix of this connective tissue. Some of the important plasma proteins found in the blood plasma include albumin, which contributes to the colloid osmotic pressure, which basically is what allows it to pull water into the blood vessels, and blood viscosity. So remember that blood is thicker than water. And also, albumin helps to maintain the pH of the blood itself. You have globulins. The most well-known kind is the immunoglobulins, which are antibodies. And then there are some others, such as hemoglobin, which helps transport nutrients. And then fibrinogen, which is a protein that plays an important role in clotting for blood clots. Then we have the formed elements. We have the vast majority, like I said before, is red blood cells, 98.9%, and then about 1% is platelets. These are not complete cells, versus the white blood cells, which there are a number of kinds of, and these are true cells because they actually have all the components that you expect of a cell: nucleus, various organelles, and so forth. And we're going to talk about all these different kinds of white blood cells in this lecture. But first, let's talk about how blood cells are formed. Well, this is done by a process called hemopoiesis. And huge bulk, sometimes for some of the cells, all of this occurs in the red bone marrow. So you start off with a pluripotent stem cell. Pluripotent, it can turn into just about anything, or at least a lot of things. And then it will differentiate into either a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell if it's going to make blood cells. And from there, the myeloid stem cells can break down into some different colony-forming units, either for erythrocytes, which is red blood cells, megakaryocyte, which will eventually become platelets, or granulocytes. And then from there, as you can see in this beautiful chart, you can get it to differentiate further into the different kinds of blood cells. So for the colony-forming erythrocytes, it becomes a pre-erythroblast, loses its nucleus, and eventually becomes a erythrocyte, or red blood cell. For the megakaryoblast, it becomes this huge megakaryocyte, which can break up into little bitty cell-like structures referred to as platelets or thrombocytes. And then, otherwise, it's distributed into a type of leukocyte, whether it is a granular leukocyte or an agranular leukocyte. What does that mean? Well, basically, it just means that the granular leukocytes look like they have little granules in them under a light microscope, while agranular leukocytes don't seem to have these granules in them under a light microscope. In actuality, they have them, but they're just too small. And this is how you get the various kinds of cells, either the eosinophils, basophil, neutrophil, melanocytes, or the lymphocytes. which you can't really distinguish under a light microscope. So let's talk about erythrocytes. Erythrocytes are the red blood cells. Again, they originate in the red bone marrow, and they have no organelles. They're just fluid-filled sacs. And inside this fluid, they have what is referred to as hemoglobin molecules. And it is the hemoglobin molecules that hold the oxygen when we breathe in and the carbon dioxide for when we want to breathe out. And the hemoglobins, well, there's about 280 million per erythrocyte. And since the hemoglobins have formed together to form a 4-unit structure, that means you have about 1 billion hemoglobin molecules per red blood cell. They have a concave shape, partly because they lost the nucleus, and this gives them more surface area in which to absorb and release compounds. They're basically 97% hemoglobin, and again, that binds both oxygen and carbon dioxide. And since they do still need some energy, they depend on anaerobic respiration, aka they generate ATP without the use of oxygen, which kind of makes sense because if they're carrying oxygen to places it needs to go, they don't really want to use it up themselves. Erythrocytes, or red blood cells, also have a number of compounds along the surface that can be recognized by our body's immune system as self, as part of what's supposed to be there, or it can be recognized as other and needs to be then attacked. This is often what we talk about when we talk about the blood type someone has. So if you have type A, that means you have antigen A on the surface of your red blood cells, and you produce anti-B antibodies that would take out any antigen B carrying red blood cells. And then if you have antigen B, then it's the reverse. And if you have both A and B, then you make no antibodies against A or B because you have both of them on your red blood cells. And if you have neither A or B, that gives you type O. So O is the universal donor. It can go to anybody. And AB is the universal receiver. It can take blood from anybody. So some disorders. Well, anemia. That's when your oxygen carrying capacity has been reduced greatly. This can be caused by lots of things, such as a lot of bleeding, low iron, or even some people who have a genetic disorder called sickle cell anemia, where they have sickle cells, their red blood cells are misformed, and not only does this reduce the amount of oxygen they can carry, but these cells often rupture in the bloodstream that can lead to further problems. However, we're going to focus on anemia in general, and that can have all kinds of consequences, such as yellowing of the eyes, pale skin, cold skin, shortness of breath, muscle weakness, because you need that oxygen, enlargement of the spleen, intestinal stool color change, or it can have more serious effects like fainting, chest pain, angina, or even a heart attack. So, white blood cells, or leukocytes, we're focusing on the ones right now found in the bloodstream. They include the eosinophil, the basophil, the neutrophil, the lymphocyte, and the monocyte. And again, you can have granular or agranular leukocytes. Eosinophils are, well, in this picture it looks kind of like Pac-Man, but they don't always line up quite this way. But they are large, unformed, red-orange granules throughout, so those are the red-orange granules. They often have a 2 to 3 lobed nucleus that's all connected, and they're larger than red blood cells. See red blood cell. And their functions, they release enzymes to counter inflammation and allergic reactions. So they try to stop the inflammation, the swelling from an allergic reaction. They also are very important in the phagocytosis of parasitic infections, especially worms. So they're there to get rid of those nasty worms that, fortunately, we don't get that as much here in America. And they're involved in some autoimmune diseases. Then we have the basophils. They have large, variable-shaped, dark purple granules. They often have 2 lobed nucleuses, but you can't really see it usually because of the granules. And they are also larger than red blood cells. And they release enzymes to intensify inflammation. So basophils intensify inflammation. And sometimes this leukocyte gets involved in hypersensitivity or allergic reactions. Neutrophils. Neutrophils are, again, larger than red blood cells. They are evenly distributed, pale, lilac-colored granules, I guess, 2 to 5 lobed nucleuses. Their important functions are to be active in phagocytosis, to ingest bacteria and dead matter. They engulf the pathogens, and then the pathogens obviously are in a vesicle, and then they expose the pathogen to enzyme lysozyme to start breaking it down. They also can expose it to strong oxidants, which will break the foreign organism down, and they even have this protein called defensin that forms like a spear and pokes holes into the microbes. So yeah, they are brutal to those things that they phagocytose. Lymphocytes. Well, there's a few different kinds. B cells, which become plasma cells that can produce antibodies, T cells that attack viruses, fungi, bacteria, etc., and natural killer cells, which destroy infectious microbes, and even tumor cells or other cells the body doesn't like anymore. They have a cytoplasm that's kind of light blue, and they have a huge nucleus in comparison to the overall size of the cell, and they seem to be about the same size or larger than red blood cells. And then there's monocytes. Monocytes have sort of a blue-gray, sort of foamy-looking cytoplasm. Their nucleus tends to be kidney or horseshoe-shaped. They are larger than red blood cells. And they enter tissues and differentiate into macrophages, which then engage in phagocytosis, destroying microbes and cellular debris. So here they are, the whole family of leukocytes. Now, a problem you can have with white blood cells is what's called leukemia. This is a cancer. It's in the red bone marrow, and it ends up leading to an abnormal production of white blood cells. These cells multiply uncontrollably. They end up overwhelming your bloodstream so that you basically are producing lots and lots of abnormal non-functional leukocytes and very little red blood cells or other cells. And this can, of course, lead to major problems, including death. Thrombocytes. Thrombocytes are also known as platelets. They are tiny, smaller than red blood cells. They're regularly shaped discs. They have no nucleuses, but they do have some vesicles. And these vesicles contain chemicals that help promote blood clotting, which is very important because we don't want to bleed out and die. Platelets initiate this by releasing those chemicals that then causes the fibrogen in the blood to become fibrin, which then acts as protein threads that sort of make a mesh for the clot to form on. Bone marrow transplant. Well, some people have to have their bone marrow replaced. For instance, if they undergo severe radiation and anti-cancer drug treatments, they could cause their bone marrow to die. And then a healthy donor has their bone marrow removed and injected into the bones of the recipient. And that's it for the blood. I hope you enjoyed that lecture.